Hey, it's Ed. I want to thank two brand new podcast supporters, Carrie Dupuis and Luke Abraham. Both Carrie and Luke signed up to support the podcast through Patreon, which means they support it on a monthly basis. And I've got several different options, so if you want to learn more about that, go to mountainandprairie.com/support to check it out. Second thing, I just revamped my online shop, and I bet a lot of people didn't even know I had an online shop. But I've got some new designs in there from a designer out of Bozeman, Montana named Walker Milhone, and they're really, really, really cool. Obviously, I'm biased, but we've got some bison designs, some sugar skulls, obviously Teddy Roosevelt, really, really neat stuff that I'm very happy with, and a lot of people have already been buying some. So that's another way you can support the podcast. But I encourage you to go check that out, mountainandprairie.com/shop. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Rebecca Jewett. Rebecca is the president and CEO of Palmer Land Trust, a conservation organization that works to conserve land and water resources in southeastern Colorado. Palmer Land Trust is one of the 20 largest land trusts in the nation based on acreage conserved, with over 135,000 acres of land protected in perpetuity. Rebecca has led the organization since 2014, expanding and diversifying its conservation initiatives and building Palmer into a national force in the land conservation sector. If Rebecca and Palmer Land Trust sound familiar, it's because this is Rebecca's second time on the podcast, and I work at Palmer as a conservation director. In the midst of this unprecedented COVID crisis, I thought it'd be timely to have Rebecca join me again, this time to discuss how the crisis is affecting conservation and how she sees conservation evolving in its aftermath. Once the all-important work of the first responders has been completed, what role will the conservation of working farms and ranches, as well as public recreational open space, play in our recovery and rebuilding? For those of you who love land and the communities tied to it, this is a must-listen conversation. And if you're like me and often feel completely overwhelmed with all the COVID talk, rest assured that this conversation is upbeat and solution-oriented. I imagine you'll finish the discussion inspired by the opportunities that our new future holds. And inspiration is something that we can all use more of these days. Rebecca and I cover a lot, including the importance of farming and ranching during this crisis, as well as the role that Palmer plays in supporting agricultural producers. We talk about the need to focus on community building and strong partnerships, as well as the conservation opportunities that could arise post-COVID. Finally, we discuss leadership lessons and how the birth of her daughter has made her a better leader. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Rebecca's, and I'm sure that after this conversation, you will be too. Hope you enjoy. On the off chance people have not listened to our past episode, I was wondering if you could just kind of give a quick overview of Palmer Land Trust and who we are and what we do.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back on the show, Ed. It's fun to be here. Palmer Land Trust is a land conservation nonprofit based in Colorado Springs, but serving greater southern Colorado. And when it comes to land conservation, we really focus on three main types of projects: enhancing outdoor recreation, creating new public open spaces, trail easements, things like that, protecting robust, productive agricultural land, so working with farmers and ranchers, in particular along the in the lower Arkansas Valley, along the Arkansas River, and then the bread and butter of Land Trust for decades, protecting inspiring scenic views. So we work with private landowners throughout our region to protect, conserve their land, but really for the benefit of the public, whether it's amazing view sheds along a highway corridor, whether it's wildlife protection. Those views make up so much of what we love in Southern Colorado. And those three types of projects, we really feel at Palmer, embody the quality of life and just the identity of this amazing region that we live in.
That's why you're the boss, because you can you can say it so eloquently and so efficiently. That's a perfect description. Normally on this podcast, for people who listen a lot, it's more kind of, I guess you'd call it like evergreen material. We talk about people and how they got to where they are and their lessons learned and influences and all that kind of thing. But given these unprecedented circumstances we're in, I thought it would make sense to really dig into that and how that's affecting land conservation as we see it, particularly here in Colorado. So maybe we'll just start out and dig right into that. We're 6 weeks into this thing, and we're 6 weeks into being, stuck at home. Obviously there are a lot of needs. There's the kind of the acute response. There's the first responders, the medical people, the food banks, things like that. So when you think about this, really a tragedy, where does land conservation fit into our response to this, whether now or whether 6 months from now or 3 years from now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've been thinking about it through the metaphor of a tsunami. Right now we're standing and watching the wave come towards us, and we know this impact. It's already here in a lot of places throughout our country, but it's also going to just continue. It's going to hit us, and what is critical, I think we all know, is we need to be supporting our first responders, the healthcare workers that are on the front lines, taking care of people. We need to be thinking about how we take care of those in our community that are being impacted by this right now and who will be impacted by it in the near future. So those who are losing, their sense of financial security because maybe they've lost their jobs, those who maybe don't have enough to eat now, whatever it may be. And that first response is critical, and we all need to be supporting that. But as the wave recedes, we are going to be left, we as a community are going to be left with the destruction in its wake. And I think it is that work of community building and rebuilding and growing into the community that we know we can be as we overcome this. I think that is where land conservation has such an important role to play. And that work of rebuilding, I firmly believe, even starts right now as we're in the midst of the crisis. And as a nonprofit, we serve our community and we serve the public. We're supported by the public. So I think it's important to constantly be asking ourselves, what is most relevant about this work right now, and have that really dictate what we're doing now, and then also help us prepare for the rebuilding that will come at some point where our role will get even more important. So I think about it through a lot of different lenses. We're seeing people get outside in just unprecedented numbers right now. Nature has become a refuge for people throughout Colorado and really throughout the country, those who are lucky enough to get outside during this time of quarantine. And I think as we see people turn to nature and the outdoors and even appreciate local food, it shows you how important conservation is and how it is actually a foundation of how we live our lives. And land is literally and figuratively through our conservation work, the foundation of how we live here in Colorado and throughout the West.
One thing that I think is pretty unique about Palmer Land Trust, particularly in Colorado, is the focus on community. And that was one of the things that attracted me to be on the board before I came on full time. And we're not just talking about the environment. We're not just talking about ecology, and we're not just simply talking about open space or mountain bike trails. We're kind of at the crossroads of all these different things that make the West such a great place to live. And at the end of the day, it's how do people live in harmony with the land. And so could you talk a little bit about that, maybe about the importance of community specifically as part of Palmer Land Trust mission? Because I think it's a really unique aspect of what we do.
Yeah, I think you can't really start to be successful with conservation without thinking about how people play a role in it. And then so if you're thinking about people, that is community. Community is this amazing network of people who have come together and live in a place together, and hopefully are committed to making that place as good as it can possibly be. And so we started focusing on community as our really primary strategy for achieving land conservation a couple of years ago. And I think that really came about because we've been doing really, really good work for decades. But the board and leadership on the staff really saw that if we were going to have the impact we wanted, we needed to scale it, and we needed to become more focused on what we were trying to achieve, and not just focus on transactions. It's not just about a single easement. What is the point of that easement? Why does it matter? And for us, as soon as we started getting to the heart of the why, it became clear that the why is because of what people can get out of it, and how people play an important role in making sure this landscape is here, not only today, but into the future for future generations. And recognizing that land conservation, there are a lot of reasons why land conservation is important. Obviously, the ecological reasons are clear. But what we really identified as we dug into the community element is that there are other reasons as well that make it then so much more relevant, I think, to a broader swath of people. In Southern Colorado, land conservation is a foundation of our economy. When you look at agriculture, when you look at tourism, when you look at recreation and how that supports the economy, it's a foundation of our public health. By allowing people to get outside. And we're seeing that right now during this time of COVID. And a foundation of our quality of life. And so I think it was all of that coming together through this fabric of community that really allowed us to position land conservation in a more relevant light for a greater portion of our service area and the people who live there.
Yeah, I think that's, I completely agree with all that. That's very well put. And, kind of back to the COVID and how that has affected our work. In my little corner of Palmer Land Trust and what I do, I'm dealing with a lot of the agricultural producers. And, since I've joined on, and then even in my career before coming to Palmer, just constantly talking about the importance of agriculture and the need for agriculture. And, for things like local food and farmers market, all the way to national security. If we're having to import all our food, we're going to be in big trouble. And it's amazing because I've been talking about that for probably 10 years now. And it's like one person at a time trying to convert people to understand that, people who haven't previously understood it. And now in the course of about 2 weeks from when this lockdown started, everybody very quickly has, or the vast majority of people have understood how important agriculture is and what an important role it plays in society. And so could you talk a little bit about that and about Palmer's role in supporting agriculture and conserving agricultural land, and how you see this crisis will benefit agriculture in the future?
Yeah, I think these challenging times we're living in really are illuminating the things that we perhaps take for granted under normal times. And as people have gone to the grocery store over these last few weeks and have seen empty shelves, it's that suddenly makes what is so important, like food security and having just enough to eat, it suddenly puts it in stark perspective. And when the grocery shelves are full, it was so easy to take it for granted. So what we have seen, and what you've seen certainly through your work with farmers and agricultural producers in this time, is that people are starting to pay attention. Where does our food come from? And we have become so disconnected as a society from the source of our food. And it has been challenging for Palmer over these last couple of years as we've really increased our work with local producers to convey the importance of this to people in Colorado Springs or El Paso County. this is suddenly presenting us with an opportunity. And when you look at a place like Colorado Springs, just to take that as an example, there is not a lot of local food production that is happening right here in our county. We don't have a lot of water, native water. We ship a lot of it from the western slope, and that Colorado water law is a discussion for a whole other podcast. But where we do have amazing local food resources is just 50 miles south of us along the Arkansas River, and what we're seeing is more attention being paid to food security, and ultimate food security solutions can be found by enhancing our local food systems. And the work of Palmer, at the end of the day, we're focused on making sure that agricultural land is kept in production. And we do that by conserving it in partnership with landowners, with farmers, with ranchers. And we are certainly seeing the importance of that really escalate during these times. In addition to just the securing and making sure this land is available for food production, the work that we do is providing, in a lot of cases, a lifeline for agricultural producers. When we work with them to, for instance, put a conservation easement on their property, we're often providing them some financial incentive to do that. And that financial incentive, whether it's through a cash payment for the easement, or whether they can take that and get tax credits through the state of Colorado, that cash is usually, in a lot of cases, the thing that is helping them keep going. And our agricultural producers operate on such a thin margin, even in the best of times. And what we're seeing, the role that we have to play ultimately, I think, is increasing awareness so that there's more support for our agricultural producers, and helping to provide them the resources that they need so that they can continue to do what they love, which is farming the land, ranching the land, producing local food for our communities.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I think one of the things that has struck me since I've been at Palmer full time is, in my previous career, it was real estate. And generally in real estate deals, they're adversarial, and there's a winner and there's a loser. And your goal, whether it doesn't sound all that great, but it's the truth. Your goal is to get the best of the person on the other side of the table, because in the end, it's all about money. And what I've found so refreshing and just really inspiring about the work we're doing at Palmer is we're able to do these real estate deals and everybody wins. We're able to provide cash to a farmer so that they can expand their operations or pay down debt or do whatever they need to do. And we get what we want, which is conservation and playing a part in kind of bolstering the community. They get what they want, some cash and ability to expand their operations. And literally, everybody walks away happy, and good is being done. The world is a better place because that happened. And it's, you and I have talked about this a lot, because I think I almost have like PTSD from some of the fights I used to get in with, in real estate deals with people. And it's really an inspiring thing that I think a lot of people don't fully understand. I think a lot of people, when they think of land conservation, they think of, a beautiful place where some elk are frolicking around. But, we're talking community, we're talking people, and it's extremely inspiring.
It's such a good way to put it, the win-win. And I think even extending that to the win-win-win, where it's, what are we getting out of it as, from our conservation mission? What is the landowner, the farmer, the rancher getting out of it? And then what is the public getting out of it? And at the end of the day, finding that nexus of public benefit, conservation benefit, and personal benefit to an agricultural producer, that is huge. And as you know, we're always looking through the lens of the win-win-win with our projects. And, if we can't actually identify those wins for each of those important stakeholders, it's a project we probably won't take on then, because we're almost relentlessly focus on how do we get the most leverage for each of those elements. How do we get the most leverage for our public donations to accomplish this mission? How do we get the most leverage with an incredible contribution that a landowner is making when they decide to conserve their land? They're giving up a lot when they do that. I think it's such a wonderful way to look at it. And I agree with you. I don't think that's always very well understood when people think about land conservation.
So another aspect of Palmer, which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on the board, and then obviously one of the reasons I wanted to come on full time, is just the diversity of what we do. And at the time, 2 or 3 years ago, whenever I initially got involved, it just seemed interesting and fun and challenging. And that's what I liked about it. But now, we're living in a different world. And I think the diversity of what we do has proven to allow us to be more effective. Once as you said, once the tsunami tidal wave recedes and we're trying to move forward, because of our diversification of what we do, we're in a good financial position. We're in a good position to kind of find opportunities and go after them versus just being like a one-trick pony where we just do one type of conservation and that's it. So could you talk a little bit about, in your role as CEO over the years, how you have, why you decided to kind of diversify things before we even knew that such a thing as this COVID was an option, and then how you see us being able to serve the community better because of the position that we're in through diversification?
I started at Palmer 6 years ago, and at that time, it in a lot of ways, I saw the writing on the wall that if we were to continue our work and have our business model, I'm putting that in air quotes, be solely focused on conservation easement transactions, it was just pretty clear to me that that wasn't a sustainable model in the future. It was too reliant on essentially one tool to accomplish this work, when instead we really needed to be looking at creating a whole toolbox of conservation tools, tactics, techniques in order to be successful. And that really stemmed from wanting to see our impact really increase and to escalate the scale of conservation. I think a lot of nonprofits kind of easy to get sucked into focusing on, well, how do we survive? How do we do our work and how do we survive? And I think if we can get beyond an organization on its own and really think about what are we actually trying to achieve and how is this organization the best vehicle for achieving that impact, for me, at least, it allowed me to have much more expansive thinking about conservation and even getting beyond, well, we're a land trust, so, we should just be holding easements. Well, no, land trust may be in our name, but at the end of the day, our why for existing is land conservation and preserving this amazing landscape throughout southern Colorado. Once we started taking that more expansive view and we added that critical ingredient of people and community into our work, it's a whole path, or a whole forest of paths opened up for how we could accomplish this work. And today, I think it's so interesting, and you know this through your work in Pueblo County that you take the lead on. It used to be maybe 3-4 years ago, we would do a project and 90% of it would be the conservation easement and putting that into place. And maybe 10% was what I'll just call other, leading up to that point. Well, now we're working on projects where maybe the easement is the last 10%, if we do an easement at all, because we also are working now with other tools. But the 90% leading up to what we would have traditionally referred to as conservation has now become, in many ways, the bulk of our work. And it includes things like community engagement. It includes things like putting resources together for our communities and for landowners. We're working on, for example, a big economic impact study right now that will make the case, hopefully, for a broader community of the importance of a particular project we're working on. We're involved in legislative work and policy work. We're involved in awareness building and bringing the land to people, so that they can care more, and growing a bigger network of advocates. And all of this has allowed our business model, air quotes, to really diversify in a way that I think is critical for our sustainability. And as we look at the current crisis, we're making budget cuts. Everyone is. But there is a path through this for us where I actually firmly believe our work will be stronger. And if we can stay focused on what is most relevant right now and continue to build our toolbox of conservation tactics and techniques, I hope in the end can actually come out of this in a much stronger position with more people engaged in this important work.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I think our business model, any business has their business partners, and our partners, we've got everything from individual donors who are very generous with their personal financial resources. And then we've got big foundations and impact investment funds and this wide array of partners. And I think when I started, we've talked about this, but I think I was somewhat naive about how the business worked, because I just figured, people donate their money and donate monthly or donate at the end of the year, and that funds operations. And here we are 2 years into it almost, and a lot of my job is raising money from foundations or other partners who put in, hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. And one of the most inspiring things of this whole, aspects of this whole crisis has been how these foundation partners have responded, and some, governmental sources of funding have responded. So could you talk a little bit about the importance of those partners and how they've responded and how you see them being partners in this thing moving forward as the tidal wave recedes?
Yeah, the philanthropic sector, I think, is so critical. And in times like these, we do see philanthropists, foundations, other funding sources, have to really take a hard look at how they're going to do their work. And as you know, because we've been talking to a lot of our funders, we've had a lot of conversations with people over the last couple of weeks, and we're seeing firsthand how funders are grappling with where they can have the greatest impact in a time like this. And I will say some of our closest funders, it's been really wonderful to work with them, and I appreciate how they are making these tough calls on how much to continue to invest in conservation and how much they need to invest in those first responders. And it's, I'll call out one in particular because they're just such a wonderful partner of ours, the Gates Family Foundation. This is the Colorado-based Gates, not Bill and Melinda. But the Gates Family Foundation in Colorado is one of our strongest, most amazing partners. And, they've made decisions like loosening some of the restrictions on their money that they've given to us, recognizing and really empowering us as their on-the-ground partner to make some judgment calls on how we need to use that money. So decoupling some of the maybe firm deliverables we had talked about as much as a year or two ago, and recognizing that the world has changed, and then working very closely with us and providing flexibility on how that funding is used. We have amazing partners like Great Outdoors Colorado, which is funded from our state lottery proceeds, one of the only states that directs their lottery proceeds to natural resources and outdoor recreation. Partners like them, they have been incredibly supportive, and they're thinking very strategically about how they can use their funding, which must be used for this type of work. But how can they get even more strategic and support their on-the-ground partners like Palmer and other land trusts and nonprofits? And so our most effective relationships are those ones where we can have a really good conversation as a partner, as a partnership together on, what do we need to do? How do we do that work? Has the relevance of this work shifted? What does that look like? How do we change our work plans around that? And also, these folks have asked us the question of what do we need, even outside of maybe programmatic funding? What do we need to support our operations? I know a lot of nonprofits are asking tough questions right now, looking at their budgets and trying to figure out what they need to do. And we're all cutting our costs, and we're all projecting pretty significant revenue declines over the next year and probably beyond, and declines, on the order of 25 to 50% even. And so as we are making very tough decisions, but also committed to making sure this work continues, funding partners like foundations and individuals are so important right now. And it's really, we're seeing our conservation community come together in this time in a way that is certainly providing us a lot of support, which in turn allows us to support the communities that we serve.
And for people who listen to the podcast a lot, the Gates Family Foundation may sound familiar, and that's because that is where Russ Schnitzer, he is one of the program officers there, and I'll put a link to that interview in the podcast notes. But if you want to hear more about how they go about funding projects and really get into the details, that was a really cool conversation. Plus, Russ was a smoke jumper, and we talk about that, so that's fun. One of the issues with land conservation that we've talked about a lot, particularly the type of land conservation we do, is that it's somewhat technical. It's real estate transactions, basically, the old school conservation easement aspect. And so without the ability to tell these stories in an engaging way, people's eyes glaze over. And I know that because it took me a long time to figure out how to tell the stories in a way that were engaging and fun and not like a boring real estate class in grad school or something. And so in the last year and a half, I feel like Palmer has really, really stepped things up as far as communications and storytelling. And we've just got this great team in place on kind of the other side of the office from where I sit. Could you talk about the importance of storytelling and the importance of communicating these issues in an engaging way? Because I feel like we're doing that in a pretty cool way.
At the end of the day, people relate to other people, right? And and that's something it took us, I think, a long time to really figure out at Palmer and within the land conservation community in general. We joke about, there's a phrase, bucks and acres, and that's how we used to tell the story. How many dollars did we raise for a project, and how many acres did we conserve? And there's still an element of that, of course, but to be able to move beyond just the hard, cold numbers. And to move beyond the details of a conservation easement, which are important to all of us who like to geek out on that, but it gets back to that relevance and to engage a broader network of advocates for this work, which at the end of the day is what we are trying to do, is rally our community around supporting this. We have to connect in a more relevant way, and we have to connect on a plane where people see why this work directly impacts their life for the better. And I think doing that through stories is the best way to do it, because you can tell the story of conservation through the lens of a person, whether it's a farmer, whether it's a family who's lived on the land for generations, whether it's just somebody who enjoys hiking or running on trails like we all do. And so storytelling is so powerful because it makes it real, and people can, I think, really better understand the importance of this work and why they should care about it through, and stories are the vehicle for doing that. You and I are both Seth Godin fans,
yes,
as we've talked about a lot. And I'm currently reading his book, This Is Marketing. And he talks a lot about that. And he's such a guru when it comes to this work. And I'd recommend, if anyone is trying to do more of this and just connect to people more, Seth is the resource for that. And he talks a lot about stories and a lot about how, if we're trying to engage people in something, or if we're trying to sell something, it's all about connecting with people, because people are just like us. So what would we want to hear? Mm-hmm. And it's such an important way to look at it. But I think it's so easy, especially in the land trust world, where that doesn't come naturally to us, because we work in real estate and we work using a legal document at the end of the day as our most powerful tool for doing this work. So we had to bring that people side into it, which is, as everyone can tell from this conversation, a real theme of ours at Palmer, bringing people into the work.
I feel like I've learned that the importance of people just from doing this podcast, and I was doing this before I came to Palmer, but people love learning about other people. And then when you start looking at successful marketing, whether it's in conservation or just successful storytelling, like Hampton Sides, for example, who wrote one of my favorite books, Blood and Thunder. If you look at that book, it's one character sketch after another. And you can imagine how dry and boring a sweeping history of the southwestern United States could be if told just, all right, then this happened and then this happened. But he tells these stories of people. And I feel like that's what we're doing at Palmer, is telling stories of people. And I won't get ahead of the messaging, but we'll be announcing a conservation deal that we just recently completed. That's a wonderful people story. And the farming's great, the land's great and all that. But at the end of the day, it's helping people, and they're interesting people, and they're funny people too. And so I think it's, not to give away our secrets, but I think that's the key. And I think, I've really realized that in my little world that the people are the key. When you think about 3-4 years from now, this, hopefully there'll be a vaccine. Hopefully the economy will be on the way up, if not recovered, optimistically. How do you see the landscape of the business of conservation, in Colorado or maybe even nationally? How will it be different than it was 2 months ago?
I think conservation has easily been viewed as a luxury in the past, where it's something it's a nice to have, right? It's not critical to our lives. It's something that we can get to as there's maybe discretionary funding, and I'm talking broadly within our community and maybe through the lens of government. And that's been something we've been trying to overcome. I think what this crisis is opening the door to is conservation as a critical pillar of how we live our lives, and a critical ingredient and a foundation or cornerstone, throw all the metaphors out there, to the quality of life that we have in a particular area. For us, it's Southern Colorado, but this could easily be translated to a land trust who works on the East Coast, or other land trusts who work throughout the West. And so I think how this then impacts the business of conservation is I hope that we can move beyond viewing it as this, discretionary thing or a luxury, to really appreciating its foundational role in Colorado, and then how I hope that translates into broader support. And I think we need to get creative about how we support conservation. At least just as an example, where you and I live in Colorado Springs, we have an open space tax at the city level that supports the creation and maintenance of open spaces, public open spaces, and that relies on a sales tax. Will we be able to continue to put more and more pressure on sales tax? I don't know, because as we're seeing even through this crisis, as with the sales tax revenues getting slashed, that's not a super sustainable way to move forward. So how do we, and this is really what, I love thinking about this internally at Palmer, how can we help come up with creative solutions for getting this work done? And how do we, in a lot of ways, I think it's viewing it through the lens, not to get kind of jargony and wonky, but a capital stack, where one source is not going to get this done. We can't exclusively rely on philanthropists. We can't exclusively rely on public funding. It needs to be a combination of a lot of different sources that support this, but support it at a much more robust level than what we currently see. And my hope is that there's a reframing and a refocusing perhaps that's happening right now, at least in our community, where people are recognizing that in these most dire of times, they're turning to nature for physical health, mental health, much needed time away from the news. They're turning to local food and the simplicity of enjoying a meal that made from ingredients with farmers who are our neighbors just down the highway from us. And so it's my hope that in terms of the business of conservation, that we are operating in a more robust way and pushing forward projects that are recognized throughout our community as being utmost importance from an economic perspective and a health perspective and a quality of life perspective, and that we are helping to put together a model for sustaining that work that is sustainable and is being supported from a lot more sources than we have right now, and that ultimately has a much broader swath of support from the public that enjoys it. That's where I would love to see us go in 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity. And opportunity, it sounds, I guess, coming from my background in the real estate or business world, it sounds maybe like not compassionate or whatever. And I'm not saying that like, oh, this will be great for our business. What I'm saying is that, through this crisis, there are going to be ways to improve things for everybody. And I think I agree with you on all that a lot of the things we have been doing for 40 some years at Palmer, all of a sudden in the course of just a few weeks, it's become crystal clear how important they are. And that can kind of get lost. So taking conservation, the specifics of conservation out of the equation and just thinking about your role as a CEO and as a leader. And you've been in the top position, for a long period of your career at other organizations and now at Palmer. And when you think about going through a crisis like this, maybe not a pandemic, but just in general, going through hard times as a leader, where do you draw inspiration or draw instruction on how to approach something as crazy as this? I mean, obviously nobody saw this coming unless you're a scientist, but are there any specific people that you admire or books you've read or resources that you refer back to that help you as a leader during crazy times?
I would say that this is a tremendous crisis, probably the biggest crisis I've ever gone through while leading a nonprofit, but I've encountered much smaller crises over the years, and I firmly believe that there always is opportunity in crisis, and I don't. Much to your point earlier, I don't want to be crass about it. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a really important perspective to take. I think significant change happens during these moments of transition and these moments of change where all of a sudden, the things that we thought we knew are being overhauled, and we're having to think in just a very, very different way. So I draw a lot of strength and I think encouragement through thinking about what is changing right now and it's almost, in a lot of ways, it's almost like this crisis is an opportunity to just take a big step back and look at what we're trying to do and ask some of those basic questions over again. What is most relevant about this? How do we get the work done? Why are we doing it? And so in a lot of ways, it's an opportunity for reflection, which I think then certainly makes me stronger and more inspired moving forward. And I think a lot of pithy quotes, I think, around this, when one door closes, another opens. And but I can't help but really firmly believe in that, just to my core. And so I've been trying to create the space to really reflect during this opportunity and not just kind of put my head down and try to keep bulldogging through with what we already had plans for, but to be open to the possibilities that are out there. I tend to admire leaders who are, I think, very calm in moments of crisis and very pragmatic, that can kind of cut through the anxiety or the hysteria. And we all feel that at times, but when the leading actually happens, they are this kind of solid, calm presence, providing direction, but also a lot of transparency and honesty in leading their teams. And I've been thinking about that a lot. What what do I need to be doing to support the Palmer team and the Palmer board and our community of donors and our community in general? And how can I be as clear-eyed as possible about what's going on, but also recognize the opportunities that are here for Palmer and chart that new course. We were going to grow in 2020.
Yeah.
I had a budget that had increased our payroll line about 30%. In part, we had been holding back for a number of years, and it finally felt like we could make that investment in people and capacity. And that's now off the table. We're not hiring, put that on hold. As I said earlier, we're making, we're lowering our costs where we can. So that for me has been the reframing. Okay, if we're not going to do what we thought we were going to do with this immense growth and great plans around bigger impact and bigger capacity, what now can we do? And for me, it's been a focus on, okay, our core team and these amazing people, yourself included, who have come together and are working at Palmer and are so committed. And that has been an immense source of inspiration for me, seeing that commitment and having a wonderful brain trust of people where we can just have conversations around what this looks like, and that it's not happening in a vacuum of just me and my thoughts on a hike, but it's really happening through this team of incredibly smart, passionate people that are bringing a lot of different perspectives to bear. And what's coming out of it so far as I can tell, is some just, I think, really fresh, renewed, inspired thinking that, we don't have a full game plan yet, but we're figuring it out and we're continuing to work hard. And that's where, to your question earlier about, where are we in 3 to 4 years? I really believe we're stronger. And I think we're going to look back at this year, and maybe it's a 2-year time frame, as such a big inflection point for conservation. But that allowed us to build into the strong organization, which in turn is having the strong impact that we know we need to have.
Yeah, I've talked about it probably way too much on this podcast, but that's one of the real upsides of my obsession with reading history, is that it makes me feel better. I mean, this is a tough time any way you look at it, and I'm as fortunate as one could be given the circumstances. So I'm not in a bad position at all. But when you read enough history and you see how we've been through bad times, and then you see what opportunities came from those times, there's just no way around it, that there are going to be great opportunities that come from this. And I think it's a matter of, not being scared. And I think what you said about being calm is huge. And your calm influence really rubs off on me, because we've laughed about it, but I think people who listen to podcasts may think I'm very calm, but I'm not at all calm. So it's your calming influence has been very good for me. Kind of backing out even farther from the COVID, but still very much connected. Since you and I did our first podcast interview, there's been a massive change in your life with a little daughter arriving on the scene. And so I'd love to hear how that has affected your thinking on everything, I guess. Because if it's anything like me, it was a huge perspective shift, and in a great way. So how has being a mom affected you?
Oh, yes, in so many different ways. I have a nearly 1-year-old. Camilla turns 1 next week, which isn't that wild? That's wild. And your girls, gosh, they're growing up fast too.
It's crazy.
I remember reading somewhere, and I can't remember where, but that becoming a parent is like all your cells just reorganize in your body. It's just this complete and total shift and transformation. And that is utterly true. And it has been so fun over this past year, but of course challenging to have this little human now that my husband and I are responsible for, and whose personality is starting to really emerge, which is such a treasure. And a silver lining of this crisis and being at home with her, because her daycare has been closed, has been to go on afternoon hikes every day. And it's such I think I'm going to look back and actually really treasure this time with her. But I think I don't think I know that becoming a mother has made me a better leader as well. And I think I've become much more patient. I have much more empathy. I am looking at the world through an entirely different lens now, and a lens that, at least for me, has just made me more aware of people. And not to say that I wasn't aware of people before, but it's something about now being responsible for a little human, I think does, it at least has allowed me to get out of my own perspective and to see the world and just have much more empathy for what people are going through, and both the joys and the challenges that everyone is going through at any given point in time. And certainly raising this next generation has put a finer point on the importance of land conservation, and that what we're doing in terms of conserving land and conserving, making sure food can still be available, local food, we're doing it for this next generation. And it's really, this work is a down payment on our future. And it's ultimately, it's very hopeful work because, we're here, doing something that will hopefully inspire the next generation and make sure that there are wild places that can stir the imagination and inspire great things in the future, because here we are enjoying it because people did this work decades ago, and that we're now benefiting from. So it's wild. I mean, it's almost mind blowing. It's almost hard to describe.
Were you expecting
becoming a parent?
Like, did you expect it to be as drastic? Because I did not. I mean, I heard all these things. I was like, yeah, whatever. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And it wasn't like when I first saw her, everything, my cells instantly rearranged. But within a few days, there was a change, and it just seems to only be getting more and more intense as they get older, and I get to know them, and they're their own little people. Were you expecting it to be, or did you think it was kind of a lot of talk?
No, I mean, there was no way I could have imagined it. And it's funny because you kind of, it conceptually.
Sure.
Like, this is going to be a big change, no doubt. But until I felt it, there was no way I could have actually fully understood. And it's like, it's so hard to explain. One of the things that really struck me in the beginning were just all the paradoxes of like, and certainly when she was really little, being so tired because she, the little baby doesn't sleep much, but then being so energized at the same exact time by having this little human in the world. And today, wanting her to be independent, and, she needs to go try things for her on her own, but then also, wanting to just hold and protect her and never let go. It's all these feelings that are, I think we're just constantly sifting through, how to take these days day by day and help cultivate this little human into being what she can be. And that is just so emotional, and it's so rewarding, and it's like all the things.
It is. It's all the cliches and the emotional thing. I was actually talking to one of my buddies from high school who's kind of a tough guy, or, used to be a tough guy. And he was say he had just had a daughter, and about the same time I did. And we were talking about it, and he said that some cheesy country song came on the radio, and he just like broke down and started crying. I was like, yeah, I know how it goes. I mean, and I don't know, it is what it gives me so much. I already respected my parents a ton, but now, whenever these girls are just acting crazy and running around, I'm like, man, I don't know how my parents did that, because I think I was even crazier than they are.
Exactly. And it's it's interesting being a parent in these crazy times we're living in. And I think there's something, I feel like I am fundamentally, I need to be optimistic, to bring a kid into this world, and with uncertainty of where the world's going, there is an underlying optimism that just has to be there to do it. And it's been really interesting during these times of COVID, with a young, a little kid, you're in the same boat of just what is this world that we're living in? And what is the world that we're moving towards? What is going to change? And is it going to change for the better? And I think having a little one has made me optimistic about that, and has certainly inspired me to want to give my all to changing the world for the better. And we're both lucky to be able to work at a nonprofit, focus on land conservation, where we can get up every day and know that this work means something and is really important. And I would say that through this crisis, that feeling has only gotten stronger, of the importance of this work and on the sheer gift of being able to do this work every day.
It is a gift. And that's one thing I would encourage people who listen to this, if you're kind of on the fence, if you're doing something that maybe you don't feel as fulfilled with, and you have an opportunity, I would encourage you to go for it, because, I worked with great people when I was selling ranches, really great people. And I thought that I liked the work, and, in the middle of the work, I did like it. But now looking back, now that I'm doing a job that has meaning beyond myself and my bank account, I've just realized that there's this fulfillment you get from doing work that you can feel very, very proud of, that is invaluable. And, this idea of just doing a job just to get a paycheck or to try to make a lot of money, that sounds cool. And then some, people say that's the American way, but in my experience, I was really missing out by just just going after that, and the ability to get up and feel really good about what I'm doing, and working with a great team of like-minded people that have the same attitude. It's, in some ways, I wish I'd done it earlier, just because I love it so much. So it's, I don't know, there's a lot to be said for that. And I know people who listen to this podcast, some folks are kind of weighing those options, and I'm a big proponent of going for it. So, one more question about parenting, because when I had a baby on the way, this is the question I was asking everybody. Are there any books or parenting resources that you would recommend for people? I think I only read 2 parenting books, but they were both good. Are there any that you would recommend?
Well, Ed, you are my go-to. So my book is your book, which was Bringing Up Bebe.
Oh, yeah.
Pamela Druckerman, I think,
that's right,
wrote it, about raising kids as an American, but in France. And I don't actually think I got through the whole book, but I got the salient points. Yeah. And it was, focused on how you create more space when you're raising a kid, and you want to pause every now and then and let them, figure things out on their own, and a lot of other important points. But that one, I really did enjoy it. And I read it early days when she was born, and I've continued to think about it. And I think it really has impacted what I'm doing in terms of thinking about how I raise her. So that one comes to mind. I think that's kind of the only one that comes to mind right now.
Yeah, that was the one I remember. I mean, I read that one. I read Happiest Baby on the Block, which basically teaches you how to make them stop crying, or encourage them, not make them, encourage them to stop crying. And that Bringing Up Bebe, that's a good one. I'll have a link to that in the notes so people can check it out. You mentioned Seth Godin and his books. Are there any other good books you've recently read, or books you would recommend about anything? It doesn't even have to be about conservation, leadership, whatever. Any books that come to mind?
Well, I do have to say I am endlessly impressed by your ability to read a lot of books, Ed, and I don't get through a lot of books. I think the last book I read, I mean, seriously, I don't know how you do it. The last book I read was, I'm looking at my stack of books, Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. That one, I appreciate Brene Brown. I may have even mentioned her last time I was on the show. It's interesting to think about vulnerability in leadership. I think especially in today's crazy times that we're living through. How can we lead from a position of strength, but also vulnerability? So that one, as I mentioned, I'm reading This Is Marketing by Seth Godin. Really like it so far, and it's an easy read, thankfully. So I can hopefully get through that one fast. Other than that, I'm more of a newspaper gal myself. So I've been reading the New York Times pretty religiously every day.
And you listen to a decent number of podcasts. What are the ones you like? I know we've talked about this, so I'm asking you a question I already know the answer to, but for people listening in, what is your kind of go-to podcast?
Yeah, well, I really do. I like news-oriented ones. So I'm also kind of an economics geek. So I listen to Marketplace every day with Kai Ryssdal. Nice. Really like him. And he and another host from Marketplace do a podcast called Make Me Smart, which is, I really like it. So it's short. It talks about current events and tries to draw links about what's going on. I'm also a pretty big fan of The Daily by the New York Times. Just like interesting deep dives on a relevant topic. Recently it's been almost exclusively about COVID. That's really good. And kind of when I need a break, I turn to Fresh Air. Terry Gross, love her interviews with people. And I especially like to, hear interviews with people that I have never heard of before. And those are always pretty insightful and interesting. And then when I really need a break and back to storytelling, I am a Moth fan. The Moth, and it's so fun to hear those stories and tearjerkers sometimes as well.
Yeah, The Moth is great. I need to listen to that more. I found during this COVID crisis that I'm not listening to as many podcasts, and I just want to listen to music. And I've also been reading. I've read 2 fiction books in a row, which I don't think has ever happened ever. And I think my brain might just be overloaded with things. I want to relax a little bit. I don't know how you can listen to all that news. It makes me so crazy and anxious. Again, you're calmer than me. That's why.
It's hard. I need a break too. I totally hear you on the break. And you just need to get away sometimes.
Yes, I definitely do. Well, thinking about this crisis and, your role as a leader and your role in land conservation, both statewide and nationally, do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom for people listening to this? There's already been a lot of wisdom in here, but an ask of people that listen, something you'd like to ask them to do, or just some parting words?
Well, I'll steal parting words from an article I read a little while ago, and I had posted it on our team Slack. So Ed, you've already heard this, but it was an article from the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the woman basically said, let this moment in time distract you. Don't get so caught up in the busyness. Don't feel like you need to be, getting through everything like you would in normal times. Give this the time to actually be distracted and think about what opportunities are being presented, and, let your brain go where it needs to go and be open to the possibilities of what you can learn from this, where you can go, how you can lead. I'm now incorporating some of my own thoughts onto hers, but I think that's really powerful because people like you and me, Ed, and probably so many of your listeners, we're just go, and we want to get things done and we want to have impact, and we like being busy. So to actually pause and not be busy and reflect, especially in a moment like this, I think there's probably nothing more powerful. I think if people journal, just get those thoughts down on paper. I sort of do that on and off. Haven't been doing it as much as I want, but even going for a hike alone and just letting your thoughts meander, that's what I've been trying to do and to cultivate. And, we will all get through this. We've been playing with a phrase here at Palmer: nature endures and so will we. Been meditating on what that means as well.
Well, that's great. All great info. And I love it. And, we talk about this stuff all day, and it's inspiring to me, and it's exciting. And, like we talked about, there's so much opportunity here, and there's so much to be happy about that's going to be happening in the future once we get through this. So I just wanted to share this with the listeners so they could kind of get a glimpse into what we're all doing. But thank you for your time. And even though I won't see you, I'll see you on Zoom in a little while.
Thanks for having me, Ed. This podcast is such a wonderful resource for people. Thanks for doing it.
Hey, This is Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.